Elias Rowan restored photographs for dead people. Not literally, but close enough. Families hired him to repair damaged pictures of lost relatives, old wedding photos, burned portraits, faces half erased by time. Elias was good at it because he understood obsession. He understood what it meant to stare at an image too long, hoping something inside it would move. That obsession ruined his career. 3 years earlier, Elias became infamous online after claiming one of his clients' photographs had changed overnight. He insisted a woman appeared in the background of a restored image who hadn't been there before. People mocked him for months. Since then, work had become scarce. So when a wealthy private collector offered him an absurd amount of money to catalog antiques inside a remote estate for one weekend, Elias accepted immediately. The mansion sat isolated deep within frozen countryside, hidden behind forests untouched by modern roads. The owner, an elderly man named Victor Vale, greeted him personally. Victor looked sickly, thin, nervous, like someone who hadn't slept in years. "There's one rule," Victor said quietly while leading Elias inside. "You may photograph anything in the house, except the mirror room." Elias laughed politely. "Why?" Victor stopped walking. And for the first time, Elias noticed genuine fear in the old man's eyes. Because reflections learn. The mansion was enormous. Every hallway felt colder than the last. And mirrors were everywhere. Not decorative mirrors. Old mirrors. Tall Victorian mirrors. Tarnished vanity mirrors. Cracked hand mirrors hanging from walls. Elias spent the first day cataloging antiques while snowstorms trapped the estate from the outside world. By evening, the house felt wrong. Too quiet. Sometimes Elias caught movement behind him in reflections that disappeared when he turned around. Once, he saw a figure standing at the end of a hallway mirror. Tall. Still. Watching. But when he spun around, nothing was there. That night, Elias asked one of the servants about the mirror room. The servant immediately dropped the tray she was carrying. Glass shattered across the floor. Her face turned pale. "No one goes there after dark," she whispered. "Why?" The servant looked toward the ceiling nervously. "Because that's when they start looking back." Naturally, Elias couldn't stop thinking about it. At 2:13 a.m., unable to sleep, he left his room carrying only a flashlight and camera. The mansion corridors stretched endlessly in darkness. Then he found it. A black wooden door at the end of the east wing. No handle. Only a message carved into the wood: "Do not stare too long." Elias pushed the door open. Inside was the largest room in the mansion. And every inch of it was covered in mirrors. Hundreds of them. Floor to ceiling. Different sizes. Different eras. All facing inward toward a single chair placed in the room's center. The air felt heavy. Like entering deep water. Elias slowly raised his flashlight. Every reflection copied him perfectly. At first. Then one reflection blinked half a second too late. Elias froze. Another reflection smiled slightly longer than he did. The room suddenly felt much colder. He stepped backward. But one version of himself inside a mirror did not move. It simply stood there staring directly at him. Smiling. Elias rushed out immediately. The next morning he convinced himself exhaustion caused hallucinations. Until he checked his camera. Every photograph he took inside the mirror room was corrupted. Except one. In the far background of the image stood a second Elias. Watching him. Victor became furious when he learned Elias entered the room. "You looked at them," the old man whispered. Elias frowned. "At who?" Victor didn't answer immediately. Then quietly said, "The reflections are not reflections anymore." He explained the mansion once belonged to a famous 19th century illusionist obsessed with mirrors and perception. According to rumors, the man believed reflections were not copies, but alternate versions of people existing slightly outside reality. He spent decades building the mirror room trying to communicate with them. Eventually his family disappeared. Then servants disappeared. Then the illusionist himself vanished from inside the locked room. But the mirrors remained. And over time, the reflections began changing independently. That night Elias noticed the first real difference. His reflection in the bathroom mirror looked exhausted. But Elias himself felt fine. Then the reflection slowly lifted its hand. Before Elias did. Elias stumbled backward in terror. The reflection smiled. Not mimicking him. Reacting to him. Things worsened quickly. Every mirror in the mansion began behaving strangely. Reflections watching too closely. movement slightly delayed. People appearing in mirrors before entering rooms physically. Then Elias noticed something horrifying. His reflection was changing. Tiny details at first. Different posture. Different expressions. Then larger differences. Scratches appearing on reflected skin Elias didn't actually have. Bruises forming overnight. As if something else was living his life inside the glass. The servants locked themselves inside their rooms after sunset. Victor revealed the final truth. Years ago, he entered the mirror room too. And something came back with him. Since then, reflections across the mansion had slowly stopped obeying reality. They want to replace us, Victor. They study us first. Elias nervously. That's impossible. Victor suddenly grabbed him violently. Have you looked away from a mirror recently and felt like someone was still standing there? Silence. Because Elias had. Repeatedly. That night the power failed. Darkness swallowed the mansion completely. Then came the sound. Knocking. From inside the walls. No, from inside the mirrors. Elias used his flashlight carefully while moving through the halls. Every mirror he passed now reflected empty hallways. No Elias. No flashlight. Nothing. Then he saw himself standing at the corridor's end. The other Elias looked normal. Except for the eyes. Completely black. The reflection smiled slowly. Then stepped out of the mirror. Glass bent around its body like water. Elias ran. The thing followed calmly. Not rushing. Because it knew the house better than he did. And worse, it knew him perfectly. Elias reached the mirror room again accidentally. Or maybe intentionally. The door slammed shut behind him. Every mirror in the room now reflected different versions of him. Some injured. Some older. Some dead. And all of them watching. Then the reflections began speaking simultaneously. You look too long. The room lights flickered alive one by one. And Elias realized something horrifying. There were far more reflections than mirrors. Some figures had no real counterpart standing in the room. They were already here. Watching from the other side. Waiting. The black-eyed version of Elias stepped into the center chair. Then spoke calmly. Do you know why humans fear mirrors? Elias backed away silently. Because part of you always suspects the reflection is the original. All the reflections smiled together. The black-eyed Elias continued. You think you are observing us. But every mirror is also observing you. Then every reflection in the room began moving independently. Walking. Whispering. Approaching the glass slowly from the inside. Thousands of fingers pressing against mirror surfaces. Trying to come through. Victor entered suddenly carrying a hammer. He smashed one mirror. A scream echoed through the room. Not human. The reflections twisted violently in rage. Victor shouted, break the center mirror. Elias turned. At the room's center stood the largest mirror of all. Unlike the others, it reflected nothing. Just darkness. Something moved inside it. Huge. Watching. The source. The reflections began emerging fully now. Distorted people climbing out of mirrors with snapping limbs and stretched smiles. Victor held them back while Elias grabbed the hammer. He swung hard against the center mirror. Crack. The entire mansion shook. The reflection screamed. Again. Crack. The black-eyed Elias rushed toward him violently. Elias smashed the mirror one final time. The glass exploded outward. Darkness burst from inside the mirror room like smoke flooding the mansion. Then, silence. Morning arrived quietly. Snow covered the estate. Police found Elias wandering alone outside the mansion hours later. The mirror room no longer existed. Just a collapsed empty chamber. Victor was gone. So were the servants. No bodies were ever found. Months later, Elias returned home trying to forget everything. One evening, while brushing his teeth, he accidentally looked into the bathroom mirror too long. And for one brief second, his reflection looked relieved. Like it had finally found him again.